So welcome back and welcome to everyone online, new and back. I just want to start off with sharing my excitement and delight that we're here celebrating the 5th birthday for the BPRG, and what an amazing experience it's been for 5 years to watch this community grow. Really what we're all about is community building and also education. And it's grown beyond my wildest dreams, and I certainly couldn't have done it with an amazing team supporting me. And so I would like to acknowledge the team that's supporting me. First of all, Sherry, and we so wish Sherry could be here, and she's definitely here in spirit. Sherry and I meet weekly and cook up ideas and make some of them happen. And most of all, we have a really good time together. So love you, Sherry. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Love you too. Thanks, everyone.
And then Ron, wherever Ron is in the back, but we could not do these gatherings without Ron. So thank you. And also to Georgie, it's wonderful to have you here. Georgie is now immersed in medical school, so we're really lucky to have a Georgie sighting. Thank you so much. And Dick Simon, who's also been in from the beginning. Thank you for all your support. And Dick brought on these are all board members so far, and brought his son Alex, who's been helpful in connecting us to different people in this environment. Alex, we miss you today, but thank you for your help. And then last, and of course not least, my wonderful husband, Yvan, who's our treasurer, secretary, lawyer. Basically, he does it all.
And as the barbecue chef at the first meeting.
The barbecue chef.
Oh, I forgot that. And also wanted to acknowledge there were 12 of us in our backyard in 2018, which I think most people know that. We have 10 of the 12 here today. If people want to raise their hands, it was really amazing. And the 2 who aren't here, it's just because they have marital obligations or child obligations and couldn't be here. So we're missing Marissa and Bahar, but they're with us in spirit, we know. The other acknowledgement I would like to make is we have a very honored guest here, and that would be Bill Richards. Thank you so much, Bill, for traveling up with. So I was lucky enough to have Bill as my mentor in 2016 when I did the CPTR course, and have treasured our friendship. And I thought it would be fun to ask how many people in this room have been influenced by Bill Richards. And I can't imagine nobody. And so thank you, Bill and Ron, for making this happen. It's wonderful to have you with us.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we're ready to dive into the program. This also, what I've been saying, and I think I can say this publicly, but my mama bear heart is exploding with pride and love for these 3 guys. So I'm just so excited to have you here and to have you tell us what you've done in the last 5 years. It's really been amazing. I don't think any of us could have imagined 5 years ago sitting in our backyard that we would be here talking about really legitimate work. And have fun doing it most of the time. So I think most people know, but I have very formal introductions to make.
It's good New England.
Well, this is Franklin King IV.
Hey, I said just Franklin King.
So Franklin's
Outed.
what is your email? So Franklin is a psychiatrist and a director of training and education at the Mass General Center for the Neuroscience of Psychedelics. And he's a clinical instructor at Harvard Medical School. He's focused on education initiatives for psychedelic assisted therapy as well as clinical research utilizing these therapies for a variety of chronic conditions within as well as outside of psychiatry. Thank you.
So I thought before starting, I went through and found this email from July 10th, 2018. The subject is ? Dinner 716. Hi, Franklin. Shippen and I are hoping that you and your girlfriend, my now wife, might be able to join us for dinner here in Cambridge next Monday, 7/16. Yvan Beaussant, who is the French oncologist I mentioned to you, who is just beginning his palliative care fellowship at DFCI, is coming, and I'm hoping to have a few others who share our common interest. Warmly, Anne. Just amazing. So just amazing to be here. How much has changed. And thank you personally, Ron. It's so great to be back here at your house. So I work at Mass General. My title there, as Anne mentioned, is Director of Training and Education. And just before saying some of the things that I've done and I'm working on, I think, as the years have gone on, what becomes more and more important to me is not psychedelics or even psychedelic assisted therapy, but what we mean when we say that, and what are the underlying values and the ethos behind when we're talking about that. Because I think there's a lot of interest in psychedelics as drugs, and there's a lot of interest and excitement in a sort of intervention-based way of thinking about PAT, psychedelic assisted therapy. And I think it's really important to step back and think of it more as a process. It doesn't have a beginning and an end. And I think there's a lot of pressure to kind of narrow the focus of psychedelics into a much more limited thing. So that's kind of what I see my mission as when I'm working on anything involving education, speaking about them, trying to both curb enthusiasm, but also just have a little bit of a deeper way of thinking about them. So the things that I've worked on over the last 5 years, I'll start with a conference because we just had this last week, 2 weeks ago. So we have an annual conference through the Mass General Psychiatry Academy. We've had about 400 people the last 2 years. First one was virtual. A lot of people in this room were there speaking. And so that's been exciting. And my hope is to continue to grow that conference. And I'm speaking with some of the folks involved in the gift that Harvard University got to see if there might be some synergy to have a much more broader focused conference on not just the psychiatric and medical aspects of this. So we'll see if we can pull that off in the coming years. The second is the Harvard Interdisciplinary Program in Psychedelics, which I have been co-developing with Roxy Sholivar, and where's Mike? And Mike Alpert. And so this was an idea that took about 2 years to execute. Started with a conversation with Rick Doblin. Is he here yet?
No, I'm just texting him.
He'll be here. He's always late.
No, he'll be here, but I always egg him on.
And I asked Rick, do you think you could figure out a way to get MAPS to come and deliver MDMA-assisted therapy education to all the different residency programs affiliated with Harvard Medical School in psychiatry? He said, yeah, it's a great idea. So thousands of hours of Zoom meetings later, we were able to have that. And so we had a 5-day retreat about a month ago in upstate New York at Omega Institute. Annie and Michael Mithofer, just the most wonderful people to do this, delivered MDMA-assisted therapy education. It's an education event, not training, because we're not FDA approved yet, right? And I think that was a really momentous occasion, I think, for the people that participated. That I think people went in with kind of a different idea of what MDMA-assisted therapy looks like, and really came out with a much deeper understanding and recognition, I think, that it's even more powerful than they were imagining it going into it, and also the intensity of that work. So that was, we had almost 40 different Harvard Medical School affiliated clinicians. We had an oncologist, we had a radiologist who's here, number of psychiatry residents, and then some social workers and psychologists. So a really good group, and that's the first component. And we are going to continue HIPP for the rest of this year, delivering interactive seminars at the Smith Center. in Harvard Square, where we're going to focus on all the other modules involving psychedelics. So we're hoping to grow this. This is a pilot program this year, and we want to really expand it and create a training and education program for folks within the Boston area. So that's super exciting, and working with some great people on that. And the other two things that I'll talk about are two studies that really, I can't take too much credit for either of them. So one is a study involving psilocybin-assisted therapy for irritable bowel syndrome. And this study came about when a graduating resident in pediatrics, Erin Money, where's Erin? Over there, emailed me saying she's going to come do a pediatric GI fellowship at MGH. And what do you think about the idea of using psilocybin to treat IBS? And I said, I think this is amazing. I did, after residency, a fellowship in what started as psychosomatic medicine, and then the name changed to CL psychiatry, but essentially medical psychiatry. And every branch of medicine has at least one functional disorder, which essentially means that there's little or no physiological findings, but with a lot of physical symptoms and suffering. And I've always been interested in studying different functional medical disorders using psychedelics. So I was super excited. We had no money, and somehow, I don't know how you have done this, but went from getting a little bit of money from psychiatry, a little bit of money from the gastroenterology department, a bunch of money from a pharmaceutical company called Trip, who is the sponsor, and we're the investigators. And it grew from, we're only going to have one dose of psilocybin because we can't afford to do two. Now we have two. We're doing it, instead of in a modified gastroenterology interview room, we're actually doing it at the Translational Clinical Research Center at MGH, which is much more expensive and much nicer. And we just got IRB approval about 2 weeks ago, and waiting for my DEA is in the process of seeing if they're going to let me have a prescription pad for psilocybin.
We're lining up,
So to speak. I do get to, it's not actually a prescription, but I do get to put an order into the medical record system. I can't tell you how excited I am. But yeah, so it's a really exciting study. We have two 25 milligram doses of psilocybin, 2 preparation sessions, 4 integration sessions. Our protocol is essentially based off of Jordan Slowshower and Jeff Guss's ACT influence psilocybin assisted therapy, with some additional modifications specific for our patient population. And we're collecting all sorts of cool scientific stuff. So it's IBS, so there's some stool measures. There is neuroimaging before and after to see if there's changes in the brain following this. We are giving everybody Apple Watches to collect EKGs and heart rate variability. And so we're getting a lot of data. It's 14 patients, but a lot of stuff. Fantastic. So that we expect to be starting perhaps as early as February. That's the closest. And the other study that I'm involved in, the study psychiatrist for this, Vitaly Napadow, is the principal investigator. And this is a study that's sitting before the IRB now, called MDMA-assisted therapy for fibromyalgia. And this is going to be a really cool study. We also have 2 doses of MDMA. But what's going to be unique about this study is during the MDMA session, there is going to be neuroimaging conducted. And what Vitaly studies, he's a pain neuroimaging researcher, and he studies how the relationship between clinicians and patients influences the subjective experience of pain. And he does something called hyperscan, which is simultaneous imaging of a clinician who already has a relationship with a patient and the patient, and they can see each other's faces in the MRI machine projected on video and communicate with each other. And so one of the 2 MDMA therapists is going to be in a scanner while the patient on MDMA is in the scanner, and essentially conduct therapy while collecting data.
But MDMA is easier to be on than psilocybin.
Yes, it's a more modest proposal.
Yeah.
So we're doing that, and then there's also going to be EEG hyperscan conducted during the integration sessions.
Wow.
So we're going to be wearing EEG caps while doing therapy. So
All sorts of comics I could think about.
yeah, so hopefully we'll be doing that perhaps as early as June, depending on how fast the IRB moves. But that's an IIT with MAPS. So MAPS has been helping us along the way. And some of the therapists for both of the studies I mentioned are in this room. Actually, why don't everybody raise your hand if you're going to be one of the therapists on one of those two studies?
Welcome, Rick.
There's Jeremy. Yeah, you're done. So yeah, that's what I've been working on. I should just give a shout out to my colleagues at the CNP, particularly Steve Haggerty, who's hiding back there. Raise your hand, Steve. Steve knows more molecular chemical biology. When I first met you and I said, "What do you do?" And you said, "Let me just show you a brief PowerPoint." It was like getting a PhD in everything in neuroscience, chemical biology that has been conducted in the last like 5 years. Amazing stuff that you're doing. So yeah. I guess I'll stop there.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's all you've done in 5 years?
Yeah, I got married, graduated, residency, fellowship,
So
weathered COVID.
who's on your team, Franklin? Who's on your team? Sort of who do you work with every day? And what kind of skills do they bring to this center?
Well, the center at this point doesn't have a brick and mortar.
Mhm.
So I think there's hope to rehabilitate a greenhouse, there's actually a defunct greenhouse on the roof of one of the buildings on the main campus of MGH.
Oh,
And so there's a hope to renovate this and
is that
turn
Steve?
this into the brick and mortar for the CNP.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, not a green, you're not gonna grow plants in there?
Oh, I think,
We envision not only as a space for growing plants, but as a sort of nucleus for the community to come and interact. And that might involve training in some aspects of plant biotechnology. But also just a space to interact with some of our clinical colleagues and our basic research colleagues at MGH. Thank you.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. And does anyone have any questions of Franklin? Look at the minutes for that.
Can you see?
What?
Can you see?
I have a question.
Yes, thank you.
Franklin, how much sharing is there with your sister hospitals of all this great work's being done at the Brigham and at the Harvard and at your hospital? And are these the only settings, or are there annual or conferences, or how do you speak to, say, Joji at the Brigham?
I've spoken to Joji on Zoom. I would say, I think the connections with the folks are really more organic, and to be honest, primarily through this and CIAS. So I mean, Yvan and I met at the initial dinner and we've become dear friends. And so I feel very connected to most of the folks interested in this work and doing this work, but there's not necessarily any single umbrella organization that facilitates that. I think it's just, we get together and we talk, and I don't know, hopefully I'd love to do something together at some point, and I think it'll probably happen.
I guess what's behind my question is if some formality to it wouldn't be helpful, because say Joji's gone and processed this application and then a submission around ketamine at the Brigham, and I heard from a friend in the room who's doing the same thing at their hospital, and there's a lot of learning with getting boss buy-in, board buy-in, ultimately FDA approval, et cetera. And it seems a shame that, I know probably intellectually and talking about the medicines you need at this, but there's so much to be shared and learned from those processes. As you're all pushing boulders up the hill.
Yeah, I think, one of the things with our education program that we really wanted to emphasize is to make it multidisciplinary and to make it trans-institutional, to actually formally get folks from all the different teaching hospitals to communicate, and not just from psychiatry, to get a lot of multidisciplinary influence, because I think that's really important for this work, to not just be stuck in a single rut of thinking. So I think certainly eventually, who knows, maybe there will be just a sort of Harvard psychedelic center that unites all of these things. That would be
In 1,000 years.
So I think that Antonio Gracias gift is interesting to see what happens with that.
So I have an invitation. You can start a BPRG affinity group
Yeah,
for anyone in the Harvard system, or we can define it, but that would be a pretty interesting group.
hip BPRG.
Also, maybe just to mention the Harvard Divinity School has started last year bringing researchers and scholars from Harvard around the topic of psychedelics. And they have led a great conference last November. They are doing the second one in February with a call for proposals for the different scholars or faculties of Harvard to come and talk together. They have 4 topics, so it's a great program, and with the funding that you mentioned, it's gonna probably grow, and
Yeah.
it makes sense also to have the Divinity School bringing people together.
Yes, it's great. Who knows, the next 5 years.
Yeah, yeah.
Great. Anyone else before we move on?
I have a
I-
quick,
Yes,
Uh,
go.
kind of specific, but Franklin, I just met the person who created the kernel helmet, and I'm curious if you guys have looked at using that in any of your studies, or perhaps not, and I'm speaking gibberish. It's like this really cool helmet that tracks a lot of things. I know Cybin is using it. It combines AI and all this imaging and stuff I don't really understand, but it sounded super cool.
There's a few helmets out there with stuff like that. I know next to nothing about them other than some really interesting conversations where people have explained them to me. So it hasn't really crossed my mind, but I've heard about them and they sound intriguing.
Yeah, it seems like a cost-effective way to map out like the brain on different substances. I was interested because he shared with me all of the data. The creator of this helmet kernel is Brian Johnson, who's like, I guess, famous on the internet for not wanting to die. He's planning on living forever, which is an ambitious challenge. And he's used the helmet.
More than a helmet.
Yeah, but he's been using it to document ketamine experiences and has recently shared those images with me, so it's pretty cool. But
Yeah.
I'll comment on this technology. It's called FNERS. We have the capability of doing that at the Martino Center. We have the capability of doing this technology at the Martino Center. It's called FNERS.
The
The helmet.
huge
Yeah.
neuroimaging center at MGH.
The disadvantage is it lacks the spatial resolution of fMRI. So I agree it is more cost effective. But I think, as a pilot study trying to understand mechanistically what's going on in this very unique proposal, fMRI offers some unparalleled advantages.
And disadvantage.
Neuroradiologist speaking.
Thank you, Sherry, for asking a question online. Anyone else online have a question? Okay, anyone online have a question? Okay. So first, welcome, Rick. It wouldn't be a party without you. I'm so glad you're here.
And I do like to be the last to leave the party. But Franklin, I was just wondering if you could talk about this mindful self-compassion with that BMA project at home base that you hope to start.
So this is an unfunded study that's been written and rewritten probably 6 different times over the last 3 years. But the vision, I'm not sure how many are familiar with mindful self-compassion, but mindful self-compassion is essentially a group mindfulness-based training and practice aimed at focusing compassion on the self, to realize that one has a shared common humanity, that we suffer together, to exercise non-judgment, but in a spirit of compassion towards the self and others. And so this is a successful therapy. It's not a therapy, it's a training, but it's been implemented in various different patient populations in small studies. And I became very interested in this a few years ago as a potential way of augmenting the impact of MDMA assisted therapy. So another thing that I'm interested in long term is sort of figuring out how can we innovate within the therapy that we're using to sort of increase the duration of the effect, or the quote unquote dose. And so the idea of the study as conceived is to have an 8-week group mindful self-compassion training with veterans from home base, which is the veterans clinic affiliated with Mass General. And in the middle of that, to have 2 MDMA assisted therapy sessions, which would be one-on-one in this iteration of the study, but hopefully actually ultimately to probably make the whole thing a group study if we could successfully execute this. But in this case, the mindful self-compassion would be adapted to function also as preparation and integration, but to really do it in a group format. And it seemed like veterans would be a particularly useful population for this, given how important the group is, right, in the military, and the camaraderie and that. And so there is a pilot study of just doing mindful self-compassion for veterans with PTSD that is actually ongoing right now. And the idea behind that was basically to get people trained in mindful self-compassion. And, so we'll be ready if we get funding for this much bigger study. But we always talk about this study, Rick, and we've submitted it to many folks, but I think it's one day we will get it funded. It's an exciting idea.
Brandon, do you think it can be done without the neuroscience component, or how do you see that?
It's a meatball, Rick. Yeah, I don't think, I think initially, when I said there's been different versions of the study, some of them have, a bunch of imaging before and after, which would be interesting, but I'm more interested in just, can we take MDMA assisted therapy and can we actually augment it? Can we run the group and integration? Can we run the preparation and integration in a group format? Can we start to build a way to reduce the cost and increase the impact of a single session of MDMA assisted therapy? So, yeah, the goals of the study are clinical. Can it work, and can it work maybe even better?
Dick, did you have a question?
I'm gonna ask Franklin, everything you're doing, what do you most excited about? And second question is going to be, what are you most concerned about?
So, well, one thing I didn't mention is the department chair just gave permission to start building a ketamine assisted psychotherapy program at MGH that's completely separate. So this is going to take about 6 to 8 months to get everything licensed, but we know where we're going to do it, and that I think I'm very excited about. But that's just very fresh news, and we already have some great folks from CIS who are going to do that. But I think the other two things, just in general, I'm really interested in kind of pushing the boundaries of what psychedelic assisted therapy can do, and I think there's a lot of patients in the medical world who have physical type suffering that could be substantially impacted by psychedelic assisted therapy. So that's why I found my way to IBS and fibromyalgia, but there's a lot of other disorders that I think could benefit from that. They're actually considered medical disorders that do have kind of a mind-body connection. I think the concerns I have are just, what do people mean when they're talking about psychedelics? And, are we just talking about this exciting potential that you give somebody a drug and they get better overnight? The more I sort of focus on this work, the more it starts to occur to me that most of the things that psychedelics bring into focus are things that one doesn't actually need psychedelics to speak to. Talking about the importance of the relation between a clinician and a patient, the importance of just relations in one's life, the importance of values, meaning, purpose, and fulfillment. I think these are values that medicine had, and particularly psychiatry, has come very far away from. And I think a lot of people are drawn to psychedelics because they feel that psychedelics kind of represent those values. And so I find myself wondering often, do we really need psychedelic assisted therapy to just say, hey, we need to focus on these values more in clinical work, forget psychedelics. So I think sometimes psychedelics can sort of be a substitute in people's minds for harder work that does not require psychedelics for the work to be done. But I'm hopeful that, both can be true. Yeah, we can bring this back into medicine more. And psychedelics do kind of force the issue. You can't ignore it.
Yeah. Thank you. Sure, we could keep going, but
yeah,
let me invite Yvan up. So Yvan, why don't you actually, Franklin, why don't you sit here, because I think maybe the chair is going to work better. Let's see. I like having one.
Yeah, I like being next to you.
So we now have Yvan Beaussant.
With your best French accent.
My
I think it's excellent.
accent.
Give justice to your French ancestry.
So Yvan is a hematologist, palliative care physician, investigator, trained in psychedelic assisted therapies. He's an instructor in medicine and HMS and an instructor in psychosocial oncology and palliative care at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. Yvonne's research focuses on investigating the safety and efficacy of psychedelic-assisted therapy and defining standards of care across indications and populations of patients with serious illness. He is the principal investigator of the first study looking at the therapeutic use of psilocybin at Harvard since Timothy Leary. And do you want me to introduce Zack now? Or
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay, great. Zack.
There is no Yvan without Zack.
So Zack Sager is a palliative care physician and a psychiatrist at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute and an instructor in medicine at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. His clinical work and research focuses on the care of seriously ill individuals with comorbid pain, psychological trauma, and substance abuse. He's the lead psychiatrist of the PATH study of psilocybin-assisted therapy for the demoralized hospice patients. We'll learn more about that. And his other work focuses on the application of psychedelic-assisted therapy in patients with substance abuse disorders. Thank you. Go for it.
All right. So I'm going to start, and then Zack will go ahead. And I just want to start by saying how grateful I am to be here. And I am grateful for so many people here. And for the BPRG, Sarah, my wife, who made everything possible. Bill Jenstolsky, who is the chair of our department. Anyway, and all this, I think for me, the summer of 2018, when we met in your backyard, and was like a peak moment, if I can speak in psychedelic journey terms, but really one of the peak moments, because I had been admitted to the research fellowship at Dana-Farber a few months before, actually in the same month. And I was enrolled in the CPTR training program. And that was a relief, because when I come to the States, thanks to Sarah, who made us come and move with our 2 kids, I had my training in hematology and palliative care in France. I had this interest for psychedelic research over the past 3-4 years. I had been in touch with Janice Phelps from the CPTR program. So I had been in contact via Zoom with Janice, and I had one meeting in the summer of 2017 with James saying, yeah, you should apply for this research fellowship, like it might be a good training for you. And that's all what I had when I came to the States. And I had a year where I was applying to the CPTR and the research fellowship. And so when we got together, I was enrolled in both, and it was okay. that looks better. But so I guess if that was a peak experience, I think the preliminary step for me was trust, let go, and be open, and really taking that step to cross the ocean with the family, and knowing, well, that's going to get me closer from where the action is happening around psychedelic-assisted therapy. And hopefully I'll be able to learn about this research and the therapy and help contribute as a palliative care physician to move this field forward. And the reason is very close from what Franklin just said, really is like feeling that behind the psychedelic therapy intervention, there was a whole ethos, and there was a whole discussions around healing and around authenticity and around being in relationship and being connected as humans who are all in this together. And that was something that I couldn't find in medicine in the way that I felt psychedelic-assisted therapy would allow this discussion to happen. And meeting with you and with the CPTR folks and with the BPRG just kept validating that idea that by allowing those discussions to happen, there is the integration of this ethos into our society and lives. And my life, I needed that. So trust, let go, be open worked for me at that time. And then what I've been doing over the past 5 years is I've been a research fellowship under Dr. Jenstolsky during 2 years, from 2018 to 2020. And then I've been a faculty in the same department at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute from 2020 up to now. so I'm gonna tell a little bit about that. So when I was a research fellow, I was also involved in a CPTR, first as a trainee, and then a teacher assistant, and then a mentor. So what I've been doing during the research fellowship, I took some notes because we've been doing a lot of stuff. And I just want to keep on track. But I think one of the things that started for me was working with Tracy D'Alboni, who is an internationally known researcher whose work focuses on the intersection between healthcare and serious illness and spirituality and spiritual care. And I knew there was a connection between psychedelic assisted therapy and the work of spirituality and spiritual care. I started working with Tracy, trying to understand this intersection between spirituality, palliative care, and the experience of people with serious illness. I noted, very early, so we wrote a review together on this work, and I want to share there's been a lot of work, like interdisciplinary work on spirituality and palliative care, and they consensus conferences of people from spiritual care professionals, oncologists, palliative care professionals, and they came up with this definition of spirituality, which says, spirituality is a dynamic and intrinsic aspect of humanity through which persons seek ultimate meaning, purpose, and transcendence, and experience relationship to self, family, others, community, society, nature, and the significant or sacred. And reading that and seeing the role of connection, meaning, and transcendence, as that's what psychedelic is about, psychedelic assisted therapy. And so we've proposed the idea that to consider psychedelic assisted therapy as a spiritual care intervention. And so that's all that background really helped me also conceptualize that there had been a lot of research on how to envision how to integrate psychedelic assisted therapy into serious illness care. That was the work that Tracy D'Alboni was doing with spiritual care. And so we came up with the questions with the goals of exploring perspectives of experts involved in serious illness care, so oncologists, spiritual care providers, palliative care providers, psychiatrists, psychologists, and to explore their perspectives on the potential role of psychedelic assisted therapy for people with serious illness. We wanted to identify the priorities for the research to move forward. Like, what do we need to focus on? We have like a 50 years of research gap in this domain, catching up with the work of Bill Richards in the 60s and 70s, and then Johns Hopkins University and NYU had also restarted the work in cancer patients. So really, and these were coming from psychiatry. And so the idea was like, how we as spiritual care providers, do we bridge that and engage in this work? And so, yeah, how do we envision this integration of psychedelic work within serious illness care and palliative care? And so the way we've done that was that's when I met Zack. He was a research fellow at the VA, and we did a lot of work together with a study of qualitative study, interviewing experts, key informants, and trying to understand priorities and agenda for the research. And we're conducting this qualitative study. We have gathered these multidisciplinary experts through the Radcliffe seminar in 2020, where many of you were. And that really helped us understand what we needed to focus on to build our own research program at Dana-Farber, trying to lead this work on integration. So first is what are the clinical applications? Who are the patient populations that needs to be studied or focused, to move this work forward? Patients from hospice, older adults, people who are early in their disease trajectory or who are in remission, people with comorbid conditions, cardiac conditions. How do we make this treatment accessible to them? People who have treatment who might interact with psychedelic assisted therapy. So really, like the reality of serious illness is like, how does that work with psychedelic in a safe way and meaningful way? Then what are we treating? Are we treating a pathological condition like anxiety, depression, existential distress? Is existential distress a pathological condition? Or should we consider that anyone facing a serious illness has reasons to do the work that psychedelic allow, to find meaning and peace and connection? So we were asking all these questions through those methods. And also, what about the caregiver's distress? What about all the family system that is so much related with the patient's experience? And then what about the treatment modalities? What psychedelic medicine are we using? When, how many, to what frequency, and with what psychotherapeutic support, what kind of combinations? So tons of research questions here, and I think with the leading work of Rick, with MAPS and all the psilocybin work, we have a solid groundwork, but there is so much to learn about how this plays out in the field. And finally, implementation, like questions, very important questions around accessibility and diversity and cultural sensitivity, reciprocity in the field. All these medicines and this knowledge comes to us from indigenous traditions and ceremonies. How do we learn from that and also give back or acknowledge the importance of that? And talking about implementation, all the training and education piece, that training not only healthcare providers who need to learn about what psychedelic assisted therapy is about, but also training patients and of course training the therapists that we will need. So that's kind of how the big pieces that we saw emerging from this preliminary research to put our program together. And so I guess after this peak experience of the research fellowship, it came to integrating that integration. So that I was lucky enough to get hired as faculty at Dana-Farber. With James being so open and supportive in us exploring this and coming to this Radcliffe seminar, helping us really think strategically and scientifically about all that. And so what has kept us busy over the past 3 years, I would say, I think the big pieces of that is we received funding from Sunstone, and thank you, through Ron Meese and Dr. Agrawal, Manish Agrawal, to collaborate with them on the different projects that they were putting together at the Aquilino Cancer Center, working on group approach of psilocybin-assisted therapy in patients with cancer and major depressive disorders. So it's been amazing to see a little bit more of this group approach and not really ceremonial, but there was something about the collective experience of psychedelics that were present in this study that's so meaningful that we've they have treated 30 patients and conducted qualitative interviews with 28 of them, and it's a great learning. It's just about to be published in the Cancer Journal. Another project that I helped them with was the collaboration with MAPS and Sunstone on the MDMA-assisted therapy for dyads of patients and a family caregiver. So here, both a patient and a significant other received MDMA twice to address adjustment disorders. It's an amazing study. I was a therapist for one of the dyad like a few weeks ago. It's been really amazing to learn this work. And finally, the psychedelic therapies diversity study that Sunstone has been sponsoring as well, and where it's a collaboration with Candace Oglesby, who is a Sunstone therapist. And here we are interested in the experience of BIPOC therapists when the barriers and the opportunities that they experience engaging in the psychedelic space. And it's been really, really striking for me to learn more about the intricacy of the indigenous heritage, the war on drug, and how this continues to play a role in BIPOC therapist experience to learn about this work and engage in the space. So more to come about that, but it's a very important study. I was yesterday there for a focus group with a group of BIPOC therapists. It's really, really amazing. So that's the collaboration with Sunstone, and then early in my when I became instructor, we were working with so Zack and I and Justin Sanders, who has been helping me as well in all this work. We were able to be in touch with the Hefter Research Institute and River Styx Foundation, and they've helped us put together the PATH study that we're going to talk more about. I'm really, really excited and grateful that today the way we will talk about the PATH study will be very special, because we have Stacy and Tara who are here, who are the daughters of one of the patients who we treated. And Roxy is gonna lead us into a discussion with them for the PATH study. So just as a placeholder for that. So the PATH study has started in 2022. We've recruited almost all of our patients now, and Zack will talk more about the study and how it works. It's a study of psilocybin assisted therapy. It's a pilot study of psilocybin assisted therapy for patients who receive hospice care and experience existential distress. We have a study just being activated now, who we are hoping to start recruiting patients in a couple of months. It's a collaboration with SciBiopharma and Pancreatic Cancer in North America, where we're going to look into psilocybin-assisted therapy to address opioid-resistant pain, cancer pain in patients with advanced cancer. And so all of these are really inform our research questions around what are the populations that that can be treated? How do we design psychedelic-assisted therapy in all these different populations? With one of our research fellow who was here with us last year, Michael Yuslin, we've been working at Dana-Farber on also better characterizing people's experience in the context of cancer and palliative care, and understanding their psychological and existential distress. And so we've recruited almost 200 patients who completed surveys, psychometric measures, and found that 43% of them qualify for moderate to severe demoralization. Almost the same qualify for adjustment disorders. 25% have symptoms of depressions. So I think it's just like say something about the clinical need. And even though Dana-Farber is fortunate to do a really good job of whole person approach care, etc., there is still a lot of this distress that needs to be better addressed. We started in our research fellowship a systematic review of psychedelic-assisted therapy in older adults. And 4 years later, it just got published now, thanks to Lisa Boucher, one of a French resident. So here as well, like the population of older adults also needs further scrutiny to be to see how this work can be accessible to them. Roxy and Billy have been working on a review of ketamine-assisted psychotherapy in patients with serious illness, and that informs the program that now Roxy is leading to develop ketamine-assisted therapy at Dana-Farber. There is the collaboration with Joji that you're going to talk about, and then a lot of collaboration with the other investigators in the US and internationally who are interested in the intersection between palliative care and psychedelic-assisted therapy. So some papers that Aldo has worked on as well. So that's for the research piece. And I'm going to be more brief, but that's I think we really see the research piece as related to the education, the need. And so Franklin mentioned the HEAT program that Roxy is also involved in, and we're really excited to see that as an opportunity to bring the knowledge and the work out there. And then the clinical implementation through this program of ketamine-assisted psychotherapy that we've been working on, and that we're hopefully, as you were mentioning, we're hoping to be able to implement in the upcoming month at Dana-Farber. right? And the same idea, even in clinical implementation, what are we learning from psychedelic assisted therapy that we can start implementing in our clinical practice, regardless of the psychedelic molecule? You know, the importance of set and setting, the importance of establishing rapport, and even through. And that really aligns really well with the so I'll end with two quotes. One from Cicely Sanders. Cicely Sanders was really the pioneer figure of palliative care in palliative care. And here again, see how that resonates with the psychedelic work. And she says, while we have worked so hard and so successfully to relieve physical pain and other symptoms, we may have been tempted to believe that spiritual pain should be tackled and solved in a similar way. Sometimes unrealistic fears can be explored and eased, but a good deal of suffering has to be lived through. And thinking about how psychedelic assisted therapy might help not only do that, but also accelerate the process of that happens when we sit through suffering, and stay with it with the mindfulness aspect of it, and how that can lead to a faster transformation. And and so that resonating with the other quote from Walter Pankey, was Bill's colleague back then, and developed the mystical experience questionnaires scale with you. And he was saying in his Ingersoll lecture, if the use of psychedelic psychotherapy for the dying patient ever should become widespread in our society, there would probably be a change in our whole approach towards death. There might be less fear and more acceptance of this part of the life process. Certainly more honesty and less pretense would be a healthy change for our culture. I think that's also how I see the work in palliative care goes beyond the experience of people with serious illness themselves. And I well, give you the torch.
All right.
Yeah.
So it's really nice hearing this, because I mean, we work together all the time and we're friends, but it's also just nice hearing the story of how we all got here, because it also really resonates. And maybe I'll even back up a little bit further. So before we had that first BPRG meeting, I was a psychiatry residency who was really interested in the care of individuals who had substance use disorders, and also being really interested in palliative care, knowing that these folks were going to face a serious illness. Often that's going to be the presence of pain, and thinking about how am I going to provide care for these individuals where receiving opioids or medications for them might be personally triggering compared, based on their previous experience, or might also be the kind of thing that precipitates a worsening of their underlying use disorder and the tremendous stigma that these individuals face. And in the care of those individuals in residency, I would have lots of people who had used psychedelics and would talk about the way that they use psychedelics very differently than the way that they had, used other substances or their substance of choice. And it made me really curious, and that led me to find Bill's work and all this work that had happened, long before I was a glimmer in my parents' eyes. And but there really wasn't a way to talk about it in residency. I was trained in Kentucky in a pretty conservative residency, and I wasn't going to tell my supervisor I was really interested in psychedelics without raising some eyebrows. So I just kind of let it be. But when I moved up here for my hospice and palliative medicine fellowship at Israel, my partner Kimberly, who is here in the room, was working at the trauma center, and she really introduced me to a whole world of thinking about trauma that I hadn't been exposed to before. And I attended this trauma center conference, and they were talking about ketamine, and I was doing work with ketamine, mostly for pain, and hearing about how that could be used for psychological distress, and hearing Anne and Bill Wolfson speak, and I just went up to them and said, "This is really cool, and I want to do this." And yeah, and then I guess the rest is history. But it felt very serendipitous and very lucky, and also that first night was like particularly magical in your backyard. And there was always like this nugget of something that could be, but it was never quite clear when it would actually be something. And so it's now fun to sit here 5 years later and to feel like it was all worth it. And there's just so much more to come. And so, at that time, it was really inspiring and amazing to be around people who were also feeling the same thing that I was feeling, and this, kind of some degree, I think, frustration that like care had been taken out of medicine, and that seeing psychedelics as a potential way to reinfuse that. And that led me to do a research fellowship. I was finishing my clinical fellowship and not sure what to do next. But there was an opening to do a research fellowship at the VA. And so I took that because it would allow me to kind of continue to do this work on this intersection of substance use and trauma and pain, particularly in older adults, older veterans. And then also this hope that while I was doing that, and would give me space to work with Yvan on these projects, and then maybe in a few years that something would happen and these things could all combine, and with my ultimate goal of being able to combine these interests of, substance use, trauma, pain, and serious illness, and be able to create a way to have additional tools to address this, population of patients who often have limited interventions for the things that they're really struggling with. So the first couple of years was working with Yvan, and also doing my work at the VA, and that work was really centered on the experience of PTSD at end of life and describing that better, and then also developing educational tools that hospices and clinicians can use to be able to identify PTSD, and create a curriculum for hospices to use. And I have the honor of having to do the CME training that I helped create, which feels really fun. I think Aldo, you've done it too. And, great training. Good training. That work then led me, when my fellowship ended, there was an opening at Dana-Farber to come do more clinical work, and also continue to work on the PATH study, and then also these studies to be. And that's also where, through that Yvan introduced me to Joji, who's Joji Suzuki, who's the head of addiction medicine at the Brigham. And he was working on some studies, and we started talking then, and since then there's just like there's a ton of studies, but I think the ones that are most pertinent are we're kickstarting a study of ketamine in the emergency department for folks with alcohol use disorder and who are suicidal, and so giving them ketamine in the emergency department, and then they're going to be admitted to the inpatient psychiatry unit. And can that ketamine experience right in the emergency department be kind of a fruitful seed that can be part of their recovery journey? And so how can we do that in a way that feels really make the emergency department therapeutic, and adapt some of the psychedelic assisted therapy skills to fit in a really medical, often not thought of as therapeutic environment to the emergency department. And then a similar study that's going to start soon also with ketamine for opioid use disorder. And then Yvan and I were co-investigators on a recently submitted NIDA, National Institute of Drug Abuse, grant for looking at the mechanistic study of opioid psilocybin assisted psychotherapy for opioid use disorder. And so looking at some of the reward pathways, so using fMRI to see if we can better understand the mechanism of psilocybin assisted psychotherapy for OUD. The really beautiful part about that, because I feel like I feel much more at home in a clinical setting than in a thinking about fMRI images. But the really beautiful part about that, even though it's 2 studies that are planned, if we get the funding, it's 60 to 65 people that would be eligible. So there's a lot of really exciting things to come, both at the Dana-Farber side and at the Brigham side. And maybe I'll switch gears a bit and talk a little bit more about kind of where things stand with the PATH study. So the PATH study is the psilocybin assisted therapy for demoralized hospice patient study. And so a collaboration that we initiated with Care Dimensions Hospice, which is the largest nonprofit hospice organization in Massachusetts. It used to be called Hospice of the North Shore, but now they service much more than North Shore. And so this study is joint between the Dana-Farber and Care Dimensions. And so we recruit patients who are on hospice with Care Dimensions, and we approach them, or their nurse, who's their home nurse, approaches them and asks if they would be interested in this study. And then we basically pick up the phone and call people and ask if they want to take psychedelics. And it's been a really interesting experience. Many of these studies also, people are coming to the researchers or looking for studies. And so, we are like, it's kind of the opposite. And so about 50% of patients have never had a psychedelic experience, or had never tried any of these psychedelics. And so it's really interesting when you're like talking with someone who might be like 85 on the phone about, and they're asking you if you're going to take it too. It's been really exciting. And we've also just learned a tremendous amount. And so it's a small study. It's 15 patients. We have recruited 13 patients, and we have dosed 8 patients. So one of the challenges of this work is that patients who are on hospice, to be on hospice, the qualification is that you have an expected prognosis of 6 months or less. But we know the average length of stay in hospice now in the country, and although correct me if I'm wrong, is somewhere around like 20 to 30 days. And so not a lot of time. And so people sign on to hospice often very late. And so we try to find people who also we're projecting have enough time to be able to go through the entire study. And so some people, of course, decide that after they enroll that this isn't the right thing for them. And then also just sometimes people's disease progresses faster than maybe we had expected. And so we've dosed 8 patients so far, and we have 2 more to go, hopefully before the end of the year. And the study, it's really been amazing because the hospice is a really beautiful model, in that most of the care, most of the people that the patient and the family and caregiver are interacting with are nurses, social workers, chaplain, massage therapists. The physician is kind of overseeing things and doing some visits, but that really this hospice IDT is really doing all the work. And that interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary approach to care feels like it fits really well with psychedelic assisted therapies. And so it seemed like a really beautiful opportunity to be able to take psilocybin assisted therapy and integrate it with hospice care, knowing that the hospice would also be able to pick up the integration with their chaplain and social worker after we did our piece and stepped out. One thing we had initially hoped in the study, we really hoped that we were going to dose patients at home, and that we would be able to, drive around with psilocybin in our car. But the DEA was not like that. So we dose patients at the Lincoln Hospice House, which is right off 128. It's a beautiful spot. And we do the preparation and the integration work in their homes, in the patient's homes. And yeah, I think the thing that really, it's so there's, this study is a feasibility and acceptability study. So we're not looking at how effective it is for the treatment of demoralization, but how do we take this and what do we learn in order to apply it to a larger sample? And can we do it safely and effectively in this population? and so there's, I feel like there's more questions than answers, but one thing we've definitely seen is that we can take people who are really, really ill, and we can safely administer a psychedelic and have them have really transformative experiences, which is really beautiful. And also it feels like so much of really what's important about this work is just like the care that goes into being with people. And sometimes I have the experiences like I'm not sure how much the actual psychedelic is doing for this individual, or how much is the fact that they have like two loving people that are with them for 8 hours. Even I think as we think about how we do this work and apply it in palliative care and other places of medicine, what I really hope that we can take away is that this also just reconnects us with what it's like to be present and care for individuals. And I don't think you need psychedelics to do that, of course, and you can have these experiences without it. But I think for some people, the experience of psychedelics might allow them to really accept that care. And I think for many clinicians also to be able to feel like, oh, this is why I do this work. And so it's been really inspiring.
Can I just say that? Sorry. Just going to add that the last session that we enrolled in the study that Zack and Roxy treated as therapists had such a transformative experience following her 2 prep sessions that she told us, "I'm good. I don't want to do the dosing. Things have come up for her. She's an African American woman who has had like a really amazing life, and has opened up in a way that she had never done before. During the prep, we had screened her over the summer, and when like things continue to unfold when you guys met her. And she said, like, I'm really feeling so much better that I don't want to take the risk to disrupt that, or I don't feel the need to deepen that more. And she's continuing to go really, really well.
Yeah.
So
Beautiful, beautiful, both of you. Thank you. And I'm sure there are lots of questions, and I think we should move on to the next part and then see where we are, whether we have time for questions or not. So, well, I'm going to let Roxy. Yvonne mentioned what's going to happen, but I'm going to let Roxy really introduce.
Sure.
Roxy Cholabar, who's on their team.
Yes. Hello, everyone. How should we position ourselves?
They're a little more comfortable.
you want to drive us? Like I was thinking maybe Stacy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Here and you guys here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Great. Okay, so we're very lucky to have 2 special guests here with us today, Tara and Stacy, who are the daughters of one of the patients that we treated in the PATH study. And we're going to have now a little conversation. Hopefully the stage was, I think, beautifully set by my colleagues telling you about the spirit of the work. And I think my hope is that it will really come to life through this conversation. So thank you both so much for agreeing to come and share your experience with us. So I'd like to start by just asking you, what was your experience of having your mother participate in this research study while having a terminal illness?
I think Sarah's nervous and so that's okay, we're among friends. Mom would not have categorized herself as being demoralized. She also was in the 50% that had never done any drug, recreational or otherwise, until she had gotten her cancer diagnosis. So it was all new territory. But her experience of it, I think, was embracing the darker side. I think she was, I'm getting emotional. I think her primary concern throughout her diagnosis was our well-being.
She was very anxious about just us
after she left. Yeah. And so it gave her permission, I think, to worry about herself, like she was able to, I think she had a really difficult experience. It lasted, I mean, Zack was in the room with her and I wasn't allowed to know all the details of it, which is appropriate because it's highly personal. But her experience lasted, upwards of 8 hours. It was not a typical truncated 6 hours that you're expecting. And I think she had a really difficult time because she saw a lot of the things that she had been hiding from herself. But the gift of that was that she was able to acknowledge that she was sad. And because of that, we were able to be sad.
Yeah, and definitely after past kind of the denial of it, which helped all of us. It's helping our kids name it, attain it, just being able to let ourselves feel that got her past the denial, and all of us could then deal with it better.
Could you share a little more about how that impacted you as a family unit?
It became less anxious with us, and we could be together and then not. Yeah, like she could cry and not be anxious about how us being upset about her being upset.
Yeah, I think just acknowledging the reality that the situation really sucked.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds baseline, but just coming out of that and being able to sit with it together was the major benefit, I think. I mean, spiritually, she was always sort of like comfortable with death, like, was weird to say, but she really was always comfortable with death, like as a part of life. She didn't feel like it was unfair. She wasn't angry at God. There was none of that. It was more the pain of her life and the pain of missing us, but she was able to acknowledge, and then we could sit in it together. Like, it wasn't going to break our family unit to have a conversation about how we're going to miss her. And it was really necessary. And I think that she did calm down, like the frequency of chatter probably went down a bit after as well, which was easier to be in terms so that there wasn't that nervous energy of distraction, because I think a lot of times she was putting her worry about us and displacing like what she was feeling, which was sadness.
That's such a good point and really highlights how like intimately her experience and your experience were connected.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of extensions of her, for better. Highly involved. But
yeah, when she was open to it, and it was wonderful and instrumental in the process. It made it a lot. I think that helps us, especially after us.
yeah, I think like having the gift of being able to acknowledge that it's a difficult situation to be in, and that it was devastating to hear the news and to not know, what life is going to look like without her, because she was really the matriarch of her family. But it allowed us to have those like difficult conversations about what life was going to look like, that I needed personally. But so that was a tremendous gift, because I might be oversharing, but I was worried about, because I was just getting married, I was engaged. I was thinking about next phases of life and her not being there. And worried that I wasn't going to be as good of a mother since I didn't have her there. And she said, "You're already a wonderful mother to me." So that was a conversation.
It was really hard to just wrap your head around not knowing what's going to happen. All of the things that you thought are going to happen in life. And those thoughts are hard to have. And a lot of times you kind of prevent yourself from thinking.
Yeah, you don't want to be a buzz. She's the one with pancreatic cancer and she's so chipper all the time. Like the tone.
Yeah. Reflecting on the way this impacted your mother and your family, what do you see the potential impact of this treatment modality being for other individuals with serious illness, be it cancer or something else?
We're in like a unique position in that Tara has a long-term illness. So I think I should let her speak to that.
Yeah, I think the woman on the side, I don't think. I've been to chemo twice in the last 5 years. And just all the challenges of life. So I was thinking about studying and so just to see kind of the effect of the rest and me just being sort of trying to help me deal with all the challenges in the life.
I think this is optimistic. Tara was going through chemo when mom was diagnosed and when it recurred. And that was one of the biggest reliefs for her, was knowing that Tara's like last scan when mom was alive showed her like a complete response, but she has a type of cancer that there's no cure for it. It's a long-term illness. So it's just like, I think it's just a difficult thing to have over you all the time. And I wonder how something like this would help benefit somebody who doesn't have that like 6-month deadline. Like it could be 10 years, it could be 20 years. I mean, God willing, like more research longer, but it's just difficult, I think, to manage the anxiety day to day. For Tara, she has a son who has autism. There's all these like dependencies that she wants to be around for.
Yeah, it's just a lot, and you're always looking for something to help. So, I'm glad you guys are doing all the research that you are.
Yeah. So from both observing your mother and from your own lived experience of having, you know, a chronic illness, it seems like you can appreciate how and why this modality specifically might be of particular benefit.
Yeah, it's hard to process those feelings and all the emotions. And I can see how it can kind of just your brain understand it better. I can see all the importance of it.
I think just as important, and I want to take a moment to share our gratitude for Yvan and Zack, and also Sandra, who's not here, because the treatment really started the moment that they showed up, and mom would not have participated if she felt like she was a pretty good bullshit meter. So she could sense the authenticity, and she could sense the love that was really at the core, which was a tremendous gift.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I wonder if now we can maybe hear from Yvan and Zack, hearing what Stacey and Tara shared. What do you guys see as next in order to meet what we're hearing as a need from patients and their family members living with serious illness and having the promise of psychedelic assisted therapies? What do you guys see as happening next?
First of all, thank you for sharing and being vulnerable with us. I just want to acknowledge how brave this is, and to be with her today and just share about your experience. And I think it's you know, it is an experience that is hard to share, and it is also an experience that is hard to share because it's hard to receive as well. And it's hard to sit all together in a space where there is vulnerability, distress, anxiety. Sorry, yeah, you can speak louder. And I, you know, as you were saying, you know, what also our presence allowed maybe in your family is allowing a space for this to be voiced out and for this to exist, you know, or to be acknowledged and circulate. If there is no circulation of what is present, you know, it gets stuck and kind of also prevent the love and the joys and the relationship to happen in other ways sometimes. And so how this might help? Well, I think, you know, you speak for, you know, what Tara just mentioned speaks for itself, you know, and it's really can we, identify or other, where people receive their cancer care and have this experience, whether it's cancer or other serious illnesses. They are being cared by the oncologist, the social worker, the psychologist, the palliative care team. So that's where things happen, and to me, that's in the same space, that these conversations and these inner explorations, might need to happen. So can we have the infrastructure and the program and the ability so that every patient who show up and is willing to engage in this work and might have a need for it is able to access it in some ways, and and at least have the discussion, see whether that's something that would fit for them. So hopefully we can continue developing our programs of clinical trials, clinical implementation, to just, we have to deal every week with so many patients who are reaching out to us, want to know more, want to engage in psychedelic therapy, and just we don't have anything to offer them. So I think that's something that I'm really hoping is going to evolve.
I wonder if you could say a little more about what you think the benefit is of having these treatments available in an integrated way with the rest of people's cancer care or medical advice.
Yeah, I have some patients who I see in the context of palliative care and who will talk to me about their psychedelic experiences, and then they either are afraid or worried about talking with their oncologist about it, or they do and their oncologist is not sure what to do with it. And so I think also doing it in a way that's integrated, like as part of, we've had patients who have been Dana-Farber patients who have then enrolled in the study, and so we've been able to update their oncologist about their progress in the trial. I think oncologists really want, the reason that patients get referred to palliative care is because often oncologists are recognizing that there are ways that this patient is suffering that they can't address. And so I think that, anything that we can do to develop new tools that we can help alleviate suffering in the context of a serious illness is something that we want to do. And allowing it to be integrated, I think, also allows all the clinicians to kind of share that experience as well, and allows the clinician to also be more vulnerable. And it shifts the care, like it's not so, so much of modern medicine feels very, not formulaic, but there's a certain degree of sterility to it. And I think having these really vulnerable experiences with psychedelics or with a really transformative experience, I think softens that container a bit. And I think that's both tremendously healing for the patient and the family, and also for the clinicians. And it just allows this aspect of humanity kind of back in medicine, which is why we all became healthcare workers.
Bring the medicine space back into medicine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That one thing I would add is like the value of the interdisciplinarity is because many things that show up in those experiences, I'm trained as a palliative care provider and a psychiatric therapist, but the spiritual dimensions, may be handled much better or maybe complemented by people who have training and background in that, so the chaplains and or the social worker, the psychologist, will bring their own lens on what is going on for the patients and help the whole team better, adjust to what is going on and how we can be helpful to the person. So I think that's really where interdisciplinarity is needed. One of our patients, that we've been able to bring the chaplain in at the end of a session for a patient that Aldo and Roxy were treating. And this has shifted the whole narrative of the patient's journey and how he was able to integrate that in his life, really the importance of like being a team and with different skills and resources that can, like or strike the right chord, for patients at one point.
Sure.
Beautiful. Yeah, beautiful.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Tara.
Wow. Yeah, so huge gratitude to all of you for Stacy and Tara really bringing us all into our hearts the way you did. Thank you so much. And being such examples of why we all feel so strongly about doing this work. All of you, just thank you. So I think we won't have a Q&A unless there's a burning question or two. We also have Rick Doblin. But do we have any?
I've got a question. What was the DEA's reason for not letting those people at their homes? And I'd like to help reverse that.
Thank you. Yeah. Next call, let's do it together. So the psilocybin has to be kept in the safe, as you know that is DEA approved. And if you need to actually change location when to deliver the psilocybin, I think you need a police escort.
You need a police escort, and you also have to apply for a waiver to even get permission to have a police escort.
Right.
So
it's
one of our colleagues is doing a psilocybin study. The psilocybin has to be transported from main campus MGH to Charlestown Navy Yard. And the DA granted that waiver, but when she applied for the waiver, they said this isn't definite, and we're not going to just keep doing this for subsequent studies. So it's not even necessarily the case that they would let you do it.
Yeah, I tried after a few patients, like really with showing data, like look how many patients we're screening, and many of them could actually be eligible to the study if we could provide the psilocybin at home. And it was a hard no, like just administratively, the Schedule 1 like cannot be anywhere else than in the facility where it's stored. So I think if psychedelics are rescheduled, that's what's going to help. But if they remain Schedule 1, I don't know, maybe you could do it.
If anyone can.
Yeah.
But, and there was one question online. Margot, do you want to ask your question? It was in the chat, which I don't have access to, so.
I didn't know if it was the daughters who were experiencing their mother's passing through the hospice trial. Were they present when the mother dosed? I heard them say it was a private session.
Yeah, so Stacy, as part of the study, we have one caregiver who also has the opportunity to be part of the study, and that did we have them fill out some psychometric screeners kind of before and after, and also ask the caregiver to participate in an interview to kind of figure out, to talk about what worked, what didn't, what was this experience like for them, and how can we learn from it for future patients and studies. And so we have the caregiver, for most of our patients, a caregiver has brought the individual to the hospice house for the day of dosing. And then, sometimes we'll dose and then the caregiver will leave the room, but getting updates from the family or getting updates from the study team, about kind of how things are going. And then we also will have the caregiver will provide them with the music program that we use, so they can kind of be synced to their loved one's experience in the room. And then at the end of the day, we'll have the caregiver kind of come back into the room and start that initial kind of integration process, and then we leave and give them space. And so they're not there for like the real, thick of it, but they're there at the beginning and at the end. And certainly Yvonne's doing some work with Sunstone that is with MDMA, and both the patient individual cancer and the loved one are both receiving MDMA. So hopefully that, we've gotten calls from patients, and they're really interested in the loved one receive psilocybin as well. So hopefully that's something that we would be able to do also in the future.
Thank you. Sure.
I'm curious, how do you think about deal with the additional complication of, you've got medically very compromised patients who often are deteriorating quickly, and a substance that is generally safe, but you're dealing with, how do you think about it?
Yeah, we talk a lot about this with patients, ahead of time, and also during screening, we also, if we feel a patient might decompensate a comorbidity, during the psilocybin dosing, usually these patients would be excluded, but you're right, things can happen. And as for any patient in this hospice terminally ill situation, all the patients that we enroll on the study has signed DNR, DNI, so meaning we won't do any intensive procedures to try to keep them alive. And so then this, God forbid, hasn't happened yet, or won't happen. But if a patient were to have more intense symptoms during a dosing, we would do everything we can to address the symptoms, and make them comfortable. And we might change their hospice status, from routine hospice status to GIP, which is the more medically intensive form of hospice. And then we would just support patients wherever they are, without trying to reverse, anything that might happen that might take their life, or they might, so I think we would do what hospice does when people are transitioning, and are actively dying, and that's part of this patient population, and what we're discussing with them ahead of time.
It's kind of stressful.
Yeah.
It's funny, someone asked I can't remember who asked the question of what are you most excited about next, and what are you most worried about? And I was thinking, and I was thinking what I'm most excited about is the next patient, and then what I'm also most worried about is the next patient.
Once you complete this, are you planning on doing a placebo-controlled study? Because that would be the next step. Right.
Well, it would be really important to have a control group, whether we would use placebo or ketamine or something. We're still figuring that part out.
There's a lot of talk on is it unethical to withhold, potentially something that could be so powerful?
Yeah.
If we presume that it works.
And I think we feel very strongly.
But in this population, I would think that the stakes could be so much higher of the disappointment of being assigned to a placebo.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I really, I think that the placebo sessions are not without therapy. And so, so it's like they're placebo and that they're not getting psychedelic, but, as of course, if the ability of just being present with someone through an experience is really powerful. And, we see that from the MDMA study, we see that from other studies, how patients get benefit from, but there is a certain degree when you are worried that time is short, someone might not make it to the crossover even, right? That you don't want to deprive them of that. And Joji Suzuki is the Brigham is also really interested in trying to figure out this placebo question, and to think about what substances could be psychoactive and could be a possible control as well. So I think there's a lot more work to come, but I'm not in a hurry to sign patients up for a placebo psychedelic session.
In hospice, I think the placebo control studies needs to happen earlier in patients' disease trajectory, and this study is about figuring out how can we deliver it safely in a meaningful way to patients who also receive hospice. And I think that's an answer we can build upon, to give access to hospice patients to this treatment modality, but I don't think that's the patient population where we would need to figure the placebo control stuff out.
Yeah, yeah. And we have a lot of data, you know, in hospice about patients' outcomes and the quality of care. And there's a Medicare survey that they receive after an individual dies on hospice. And so we have you know, there's already a lot of data collected about patients on hospice and their outcomes and the experience of being on hospice. So, you know, having a control group that was matching the illness and the comorbidity to an, you know, I think would also be another way of kind of approximating what you know psychedelics add or don't add without having to give someone a placebo in that context.
And if I can just add something to also reflect on something that Stacy shared, you know, like her mom not identifying herself as demoralized, you know, at the time she enrolled, although she did qualify on the measures, you know, but that she's not the only patient that we were. You know, they were qualifying on the survey for moderate to severe demoralization, but wouldn't feel themselves demoralized. And yet we have even some patients who, after the intervention, their score might go a little bit higher for demoralization, although they would feel better themselves. But as you said, you know, it's like just the treatment is also about people getting closer from themselves and their experience, and being able to be with the emotional distress as they are with the meaning and the love and all the other things. So you're not getting rid of the sadness and the fears necessarily that go with having a terminal illness, but you're also allowing a space to sit with it when it's here and to embrace the whole range of emotions. So it's something that's hard to capture with our metrics, because we're used to say, oh, we have a treatment to treat and we need the curve to go like that. But how do you account for a treatment that also allows people to be more comfortable sitting with their suffering, you know? And so this is all good research questions, I guess.
I know this so magnificent. I know we have more questions, but unfortunately we're running out of time. I wish we could stay all afternoon. We'll definitely have you back. So we have Rick Doblin coming on. What I would suggest is don't move don't leave, stand up, wiggle a little bit, and we'll bring Rick on up.